Well, let's get the view from Kyiv now in all of this, talking to Inna Sovsun, who's MP for the Ukrainian Parliament, for the Golos Party, member of the Parliament's Energy, Housing and Utilities Services Committee as well, also former Deputy Minister of Education in the country. Ms. Sovsun, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Can you just give us your assessment, how it feels from where you're standing this morning, this afternoon for you, as to what we saw on Friday in Alaska? And what do you hope for in terms of President Zelensky's meeting with President Trump tomorrow?
Well, first of all, on a very personal note, I will have to say this. When I was watching that press conference, I saw two men, the president of Russia and the president of the United States, talking about the future of my country. But none of them is actually representing me. None of them actually cares about the interests of me as a Ukrainian, of the interests of the Ukrainian people. And they just felt like our destinies are being decided by people who are not us. And that just felt, on a very emotional level, it just felt wrong. There were two guys discussing okay, so which part of Ukraine are we going to give it up to Russia, which part not? But Ukraine is not present in that conversation at all. Of course, there were negotiations in advance, and then President Trump informed President Zelenskyy about the conversation. But the very setup just felt very wrong on a very emotional level. That was the first emotional reaction on my side. And then we heard what President Trump said. He said basically, well, it has been a great meeting and all of that. But what was so great about that? We are still not sure. Then he said that now it's up for President Zelenskyy to make the peace. And it's still unclear as to why now it's up for President Zelenskyy. What has changed since Friday? Right? Because on Friday, the weeks leading to the Alaska summit, President Trump was saying, okay, we have to push Putin to make the peace and so on and so forth. And then suddenly it's President Zelensky's decision. It's President Zelenskyy who's responsible for that. And then it's very unclear about what is it that is expected of President Zelenskyy. And it appears that the major thing that has been agreed is, of course, the so-called territorial swap that's been discussed.
Do you, on the briefing which has emerged, seems relatively little was agreed, but that which seems to basically revolve around two things. One, this idea that you've just alluded to of a territorial swap, a land swap, although what the swap is in Ukraine's favour is not entirely clear, but it seems to basically be that Putin is saying that he wants all of the Donbass, something, of course, he's not been able to achieve in not just 3 years of war, but 10 years of war since the initial invasion in 2014. And in return, Trump would provide Ukraine with American security guarantees. Do you think that any of that would fly or be acceptable to the Ukrainian parliament?
Well, the Ukrainian parliament hasn't gathered yet. We're having a session next week, so I think we'll have a better understanding of the discussions in the parliament next week. But I want to add here for our listeners to remember that this land swap is actually, the whole narrative is very wrong, because a swap is when you exchange something, right? But in this case, we are talking about exchanging one piece of Ukrainian territory for another piece of Ukrainian territory, and Ukrainian leadership is basically being asked to choose. So which part do you want to keep? And it's like asking a parent, which of your children do you like better? And that's close to impossible to choose, right? Second important thing is that territory swap is not just about the territory, it's about the people. The territory that Putin doesn't control in Donbass now, and that's the third of the Donetsk region. So it's not insignificant. It's a third of the whole Donetsk region. It does include the cities of Pokrovsk, with a population of about 80,000 people, the city of Slavyansk with a population of about 50,000 people, other cities which have about 50,000 population. So it's actually, what is being suggested is basically moving the population, because people will have to most likely will not choose to live under Russian rule. And that's going to be a huge debate, of course, in the society, in the parliament.
But do you think that when you hear talk about US-backed security guarantees, which is something, in fairness, that Trump has been not willing to engage with, especially in the past, do you think that would be credible enough and acceptable to Ukrainians and to the Ukrainian parliament? Did you welcome the talk of American security guarantees, or have you heard all of this before?
Well, we have heard it before. It doesn't mean that we refuse to engage in this conversation again. Of course, we do have a very bad experience of the so-called assurances of security, which were prescribed in the Budapest Memorandum when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal, and we got no protection after that. We ended up where we ended up now because we gave up our nuclear arsenal for assurances of security, which were never really granted. Again, it doesn't mean we're not ready to discuss it now. We understand that long-lasting peace in Ukraine is only possible with the security guarantees from our Western allies, not just the United States, but also the UK and the European Union. So yeah, we will engage in that discussion.
And what would you say to those who argue, and this includes Trump, because we can see what Trump is saying even over the last 24 hours in that Fox News interview, who say, look, Ukraine, with the best will in the world, it's obviously put up this heroic fight, but nonetheless, Russia is advancing. It's continuing to advance in key areas. Some of that territorial acquisition, that advance, has been actually speeding up, particularly over the course of this summer. Russia continues to invest huge numbers of people into the war. Ukraine, by contrast, is struggling to keep up with the conscription that it needs. What do you say to those, including the president, who say that Ukraine is losing and therefore a deal now is better than a deal later?
Well, the obvious historical analogy here is coming up to mind. Europe would have lost to Hitler were it not for the American weapons. Europe, United Kingdom, everybody were using American weapons, and that is how Hitler was defeated. And that's the same situation right now. Yes, Ukraine is slowly but losing territory for the last couple of months, but it doesn't mean that it cannot be reversed. Just like Hitler, the situation in the World War II was reversed when the UK and Europe started getting American weapons. That is something that still can be done, and it still can be another way of solving the problem is ensuring that Ukrainian army can defend ourselves.
Inna Sovsun there, Ukrainian MP for the Golos Party, giving us her assessment of everything that we've seen over the course of the last 24, 48, 72 hours. And I think the point she made at the very beginning of that interview is completely critical and pivotal. What is particularly revolting about the last 72 hours, whether you think Trump is right to try and engage with Putin or not, and of course, whether we like him or not, and there is no doubt he is a murderous dictator. He is the Russian president. He's not going there anywhere in the near future. Ukrainian security, to some extent, is going to flow through what happens in the Kremlin. But to see Ukraine, the outcomes or aspects of the Ukraine war being decided and deliberated upon in a room thousands of miles away from Ukraine without the Ukrainians present is reminiscent of the sort of great power, imperial, colonial politics that we ought to have left long behind us. It was a 21st century, or had the trappings of a 21st century Yalta, something that would have appealed a great deal to Vladimir Putin, who's very historically minded, albeit a very deeply warped version of true history. But nonetheless, that would have appealed to him, sort of setting himself up as a latter-day Stalin, carving up the world with Donald Trump. It was revolting to see.